state. Since the Romans took a decision, they were Britain is too far, maybe Britain is not very good, doesn't pay a lot of tax, it's not very good land to live on, the weather is terrible. No, it's better for me to concentrate on the continent where things are much better. And they leave Britain. At the same time, we have the object of the next topic, which is more invasions of Britain. By the same Germanic tribes that invaded the empire, and also by the Vikings from Scandinavia, from Denmark, Norway, and so on. Because in the history of Britain, you have prehistoric Britain, with people moving from Europe into, we're talking about the first wave, the Celts, and then the Romans, and then the Anglo-Saxons, and the Vikings. And all these invasions will bring us to 1000 AD, and then you have another invasion, which is the Norman invasion. The Normans are French. They come from Normandy. They have a big kingdom in France, and they move and conquer Britain as well. So, in a sense, if you keep in mind the first invasion or settlement by the Celts, and then the Roman invasion, and then Anglo-Saxon and Viking invasions, and then Norman invasion. And from the Normans, we begin to have a kind of British state, monarchy, which is going to slowly rise, and which will become very powerful towards the end of So finally, in 410 CE, Roman rule over Britain came to an end, and native British rulers were left to face invaders alone. You know that the Romans conquered the south of Britain today. They could not conquer Wales. It was a bit mountainous and poor. So they could not conquer Scotland. They tried and won a few battles, but they could not stay. The Scottish are very, very strong people, and they kept fighting. And their land is not really that rich for the Romans to conquer. Maybe the cost of conquering it was too much. Anyway, the Romans will play the different kings and rulers and powerful men in Britain against one another. And unfortunately, in 410, the Romans had to leave the different British chiefs and kings to fend for themselves. Especially when the Anglo-Saxons begin invading, and the Vikings as well. Some kings who were allies of the Romans wrote to the Roman emperor for help. And the Roman emperor said, sorry, I have enough trouble of my own. So just do what you can, defend yourself. Britain's economic difficulties were exacerbated by the steady diminution, decrease of the Roman garrison, the Roman army, in the late 4th century and the 5th century. In the late 4th and 5th and early 5th century, leaving the western part of England vulnerable to raiders from across the Irish Sea. Even the Irish on the other side, on the western side of Britain, seeing that the Romans are no longer capable of defending Britain, started raiding Britain. The reduction in troop level appears to have encouraged barbarian Supplies which had been needed to support the army were no longer required, and the coin to pay soldiers' wages stopped being imported, an indication that the monetary economy had in effect collapsed. Part of the economy of Britain existed around Roman armies. You know, a big army needs to be fed, needs horses, needs weapons, needs clothes. All this created a demand for goods which the British were happy to supply. Unfortunately, when the Romans go, that demand goes, so suddenly people who lived nicely, prospered on this particular commerce, find themselves with nothing. Two, the protection that the army and the security that the army provided for commerce also disappeared. For some time, you could do commerce and take your goods for over many, many kilometers. In peace, nobody would stop you in the middle of the road and take away your goods. Unfortunately, when road protection goes, suddenly it's no longer safe to actually move about the place. And the third thing is the money used in exchange for goods, Roman money, stopped coming in. And suddenly, if you had loads of it, it didn't mean a great deal, because nobody would take it from you. You understand? Like you did commerce with the Romans, and you have coffers of their own coins. And suddenly they go, it's like today America, you have plenty of dollars. If something happens with the dollar, you're a poor person again. And that's why people like to stash gold. Because gold you can exchange for other things. In the case of Britain, this time, people who amassed a great deal of money, locals, the Britons who amassed made money out of this commerce, suddenly found themselves with coins, but which had no value, could not use it without anything. In 410, the Britons are said to have risen up and thrown out all the Roman officials and set up their own rules. When the Romans were no longer able to defend Britain, when they withdrew most of their army outside, used elsewhere in their wars in Europe, then some Britons, locals, decided to put an end to their rule and establish kings of their own. It's just an example. A letter from the emperor told them that they must look to their own devices. However, they also requested help from Rome against Saxon raiders from northwest Europe. A letter from the emperor told them that they must look to their own devices and expect no help from Rome against increasing territory Saxon raiders. Rome itself was being threatened by invading Huns led by Attila. Attila would be paid money not to take Rome. At one point, the Huns were near to Rome and they could have taken Rome, but I think this time they would be paid, but they would come back, sometime back after that, and take Rome and sack it, i.e. destroy whatever they could. Now this brings us to the end of Rome. prehistoric Roman Britain, these are two big phases. Third phase in the history of Britain has to do with two. Sorry, I have to answer this.
خذ وقتك كلمة هذه عياتني فولان درول ولا فولان دربو ما عاودها 100,000 خطرة شوفها ما على باليش فولان درول واش معناتها حي عاودها بزاف فولنيربل فولنيربل على بالك ما على باليش بالك عاودها أكثر من 4 خطرات هي باينة خلينا
Invasions by Anglo-Saxons, which actually give us the England of today on the day. This may come from the Angles. So Anglo-Saxon Christianity and Vikings. Christianity is also very important because it is at this time, Christianity existed with the Romans, even though in Europe, in the Empire, it was promoted to the religion of the state by Emperor Alexander, Emperor Constantine. In Britain, Christianity existed and slowly developed, but as we have seen before, the Britons had their own religion before that, and for some time both religions would coexist, but slowly Christianity developed and become more and more important to the degree that in the Middle Ages the Christianity would become the church and Christianity would rule the Middle Ages and become very important in European politics in general and also in British law. The Anglo-Saxons. By the 4th century, the wealth of Britain was a temptation to the Germanic tribes who at first only raided Britain, but after AD 430, when the Romans had gone, they began to settle. The newcomers were warlike and illiterate. These, the Angles and the Saxons and another people called the Jutes, are the 3 major clans or big tribes or peoples which will raid, attack. You know, when you raid, you go into some place, take whatever you can, and come back. But slowly, after 430 AD, these peoples began to raid and stay. They did not find like the resistance that would throw them out, so they stayed. Now, never mind this Bede thing. Bede, a monk who lived 300 years later, tells us in his book Ecclesiastical History of English People, that the invaders came from 3 powerful Germanic tribes: the Saxons, the Angles or the Angles, depending on how you like to pronounce it, and the Jews. The Jews settled mainly in Kent. Let me see if there is a. Yes. Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay. You have. This is Wales.
Wales.
Kent is here. Sorry. Kent is here. And this is Scotland. In fact, the Romans did not go beyond some line here because there is a wall, parts of which exist to this day, called Hadrian's Wall. And it is Emperor Hadrian who built it in order to prevent people from Scotland from raiding the Roman part of Britain at the time. So, these are some of the kingdoms that existed after the Roman era. So we have, but keep in mind places in Britain because we refer to them all. Kent, Wessex is the farthest. Kent is south of London. East Anglia is north of London and east. It's East Anglia. And you have Essex here. And Mercia is not actually now a region of Britain. It's the name of a kingdom which existed and disappeared. Northumbria also remains today simply as a name, but at some point it was a part of the name. But try to keep Wales, at least something in your head, Wales, East Anglia, Kent, and we have Essex, East, and Wessex, West. We go back to the text. The Jews settled mainly in Kent and along the south coast and were soon considered no different from the Angles and the Saxons. In fact, the Jews were the less powerful tribe of the three. The dominant ones would be because today we have the adjective Anglo-Saxon when we refer to the original English people. We have Anglo-Saxon from the two tribes, Angles and Saxons. We don't include the Jews. The Jews were not numerous, they were not important enough, but they existed in Israel. The Angles settled in the east and also in the North Midlands, while the Saxons settled between the Jews and the Angles in the middle. In a band of land from the Thames estuary, the Thames estuary is where London is, you know it, see here. An estuary is where a big river goes into the sea, like that, like the Nile into the Mediterranean. Usually when a big river comes to the sea, it becomes larger. It may even go into different small rivers and throws itself into the sea. Usually those places are very fertile, they have water, and usually most of the early cities, early settlements in history existed on rivers, existed in these areas where rivers become flat and go different ways. And London is on the Thames slightly after the river becomes a river. So the Anglo-Saxons, between in a band of land from the Thames estuary westwards. The Anglo-Saxons would be here. You have the Jews, where the red color is, and you have the Angles here, from East Anglia, because in Britain we have the south here, and we have the Midlands, the capital of which is Birmingham. And then we go to the north of England, and then in Scotland. The limit between England into the mountains in the far west, today's Wales. The Celts who used to live there were pushed by these new invaders into Wales. And that's why today Wales has more Celts in it than elsewhere. And the Welsh have their own language, which survives to this day. It's because when the original inhabitants, they are not really very, very original because they themselves came from Europe. But you have to remember that in very, very cold ages, the sea between Europe and Britain was frozen. So it's considered one chunk of land. Frozen like year in, year out. It was considered like, like ground to walk on. It's only when things warmed up that the Channel Sea began to freeze in the winter and defrost in the summer. Some Celts were driven into Cornwall, that's the very east, the very west of England, where they later accepted the rule of Saxon lords. Some stayed behind, and many became slaves to the Saxons. Now the Britons would suffer from these Anglo-Saxon invasions. The strength of Anglo-Saxon culture is obvious even today. Days of the week were named after Germanic gods. Take Tuesday, was it Wednesday, for Thursday, Friday. New place names appeared on the map. The first of these show that the earliest Saxon villages, like the Celtic ones, were family villages. The ending in English meant folk or family. It's like in Arabic, that ending means this. Reading. There is a city today in Britain called Reading. It's the place of the family of Rad, Hastings, of the family of Hastings. Ham, which you find at the end of many English names, means farm. Tom, Lexington, Washington, means settlement, like village of. Birmingham, Nottingham, or Southampton, for example, are Saxon-based names. Because the Anglo-Saxon kings often established settlements, Kingston is a frequent place name. You have many, many Kingstons in Britain because kings, when they become kings, they like establishing new settlements. And the obvious name that comes to mind is the settlement of the king. The Anglo-Saxons established a number of kingdoms, some of which still exist in county or regional names to this day. The word Essex and Sussex and Wessex and Middlesex, these are the names of old kingdoms. But you have to realize that the Anglo-Saxons did not agree a lot, and they tried to reach powerful leader, tried to have his own kingdom. So we can have 5, 6 kingdoms in England. And this actually made it easy for the Vikings later to invade England and create a Viking kingdom in the England of today. So the Anglo-Saxons established a number of kingdoms, some of which still exist in country or regional names to this day. Essex, East Saxon, and Sussex south, Wessex west, and Middlesex probably a kingdom of Middle Saxons. East Anglia, now we move from the Saxons to the Angles. These names exist to this day. They are names of areas they exist today, and the origin is from this period. The Saxons would be in the south, in the west, in the east, in the north, in the middle. The Angles, as we saw, settled north of London and east in what is today named after East Anglia. By the middle of the 7th century, the three largest kingdoms, those of Northumbria, as I mentioned earlier, Mercia, and Wessex, were the most powerful. After a while, three major kingdoms emerged in this period. And they are the kingdoms that you see on that map. And Mercia here, Northumbria in the north of England, and parts of Scotland. Mercia in what is today the Midlands, between London and Manchester, Liverpool at the north. Wessex is a kingdom, as the W says, in the west. In the picture, on the map, it's here. This is the kingdom of Wessex. This is the kingdom of Mercia. And this is the kingdom of Northumbria. These will be at some point the three most powerful kingdoms in England. It was not until a century later that King Otto of Mercia, and now you have to prepare yourself for some names and some dates because they're inevitable, claimed kingship of the English. Now something is coming into existence, English. The most powerful kingdom at this time is the Saxons kingdom, but somehow this king Otto of Mercia, because Mercia is in the middle, so it includes East Anglia of today. This is the kingdom that begins to use to try to unite these Anglo-Saxons under one leadership. And it is this King Otto of the Kingdom of Mercia between 757 and 796 AD, of course, all dates now are AD, claimed kingship of the English, but although he was the most powerful king of his time, he did not control all of England. However, the power of Mercia, this kingdom, did not survive after Otto's death. As the king's power depended on the personal loyalty of his followers, yet the man's first duty at the time was to his own family first. However, the Saxon kings would work to replace loyalty to family with loyalty to lord and king. Here we are talking about something very important. It's at the beginning, people come as tribes, big families within tribes. So first loyalty is to your parents, to your small family, big family, tribe. This is the limit. It's not like today in this country we have an idea of Algeria, and we can think of belonging to Algeria with our borders. This is the beginning of history. This is states did not exist. was very hard to convince people to change their loyalty from small family, big family, tribe, to somebody somewhere called king. Often, this king, as he lived, maybe through his armies and through violence, he made people connected. But when he dies, that loyalty goes with him. And in fact, one major change in the way states are constructed is about this loyalty. The Romans had trouble with that. Because on the one hand they had citizenship. They conquered everybody, but amongst the people they conquered they have citizens who are treated separately in a different way, and they have the rest. Yet the Romans wanted loyalty when there is trouble. If the Roman Empire is attacked by an enemy, then they expect people to rise up and defend the empire. Before you could do that, you have to make those people part of the empire. And this is a major problem even in modern times, is how to have this loyalty move from a limited sphere into something larger. That's why it is in America today, for example, people find it very hard to have loyalty to their own state, Texas, and to the United States. Now, government and society. The Saxons created institutions which made the English state strong for the next 500 years. One of these institutions was the King's Council. We're talking about civilization. In civilization, how you run your society politically and socially, how you organize your economy are very important aspects of this civilization. And the Anglo-Saxons, despite having many kingdoms, they tried to develop some institutions, like instances, bodies, where people can practice government, can decide what to do, and have the means to do it, and check that it is done properly, defend the country, organize trade, all these things the king cannot do on his own. Now the king can have advisors of all sorts. The king can surround himself with a number of people to advise him. And this is what kings, when they become really absolute kings, do. They do not create elected bodies, or they bring in who they like and set a kind of cabinet, kind of government. They are the head of, and they have the choice, the liberty of listening to them or not. This is when kings are very powerful. At some points in history, kings are not as powerful as they ought to be, and these councils begin to take some importance. And this is, for example, how the English Parliament began. Its barons and very rich aristocratic people who supported the king, whom the king rewarded with land. Every time the king conquered some place, he gave parts of it to these people who had it. But after a while, they slowly become a body, and they begin to have relationships with each other, to the point of challenging the king at some point by saying, no, you do not take advice from us, you have to listen to us. We tell you what to do. And this is in British civilization in the future. the kingship in Britain was abolished from 1558 to 1660 in modern history. There would be no English king. It would be Cromwell and other things. This is always because of the challenge of the Parliament. In the end, after 1660, they find a working relationship. The king remains king with some prerogatives, and the Parliament will have its own prerogatives. And that kind of arrangement continues to this day. With more power going to Parliament. Today in Britain, modern Britain today, we have a king, but is there only like a monument of tradition. And power is in the hands of the Prime Minister and the Parliament. One of these institutions which the Saxons created was the King's Council, or known as the Witan, which probably grew out of informal groups of senior warriors and churchmen who advised or supported the king on difficult matters. Here we begin to see churchmen, because the church will slowly acquire power. Why? Because most educated people were educated in the church. At this stage, there is no public education like taken up by the government, any government. People who got education at home, private, by paying tutors to teach their children or to teach them. If you couldn't pay for your education, the best way is to go into a church and try to become a priest. When you become a priest, then you rise up in the ranks of the church. That's one way of getting education. When English kings begin to establish a semblance of a state, they had a great need for educated people. Some kings were not educated themselves. But when you begin to have a kingdom, you begin to have an administration, you need educated people who can read and write, to write down laws. Yes, you are a king, you today decree some sort of law. Somebody has to write it down and put it in those rolls and send it. And somebody has to open it and read it to the people. Now, those people, most of them, came from aristocrats who educated themselves, or churchmen who got educated at church. And this is how the church and the aristocracy played an important role in the history of Britain. Not only Britain, but France, Europe in general. It's more or less the same. The same way. The king will, in time, rely as the kingdom became bigger, more complex. The need for educated people also grew, and as I said, maybe all of them came either from an educated aristocracy, which educated itself, or churchmen who got their education from the church. Now, churchmen, they come as churchmen, and therefore the church behind them slowly acquires power and becomes an important player in the political game of the kingdom. Soon, the church is very important because it deals with the religious part of the kingdom. But not only that, it begins to have an impact also on the political decisions of the king, because the church will have only the decisions that will allow the church to grow and to spread, and people to become Christian, and so on. By the 10th century, the Witan was a formal body issuing laws and charters. Slowly, this Council of the King will become like an independent body which made laws. Now, making laws in modern history is the prerogative of Parliament. At the beginning, when kings were on their own, they made laws. When things became a bit more democratic, assemblies were created, and slowly assemblies began to make laws and charters. A charter is like permission to do something. The first discoveries of the New World of America were chartered, i.e., given permission by the king or the queen. In some cases, it's Elizabeth I. Chartered means authorized by the king to do something in the name of the king and partially to the benefit of the king. If you want to set up a commercial, the East India Company, which colonized India in modern history, is the chartered company, i.e., it is a company created by permission of the king to do commerce with India. In the meantime, it became the vehicle of the colonization of India. That's the meaning of charter. A charter is like a permission by the king to do something, usually create a company or build a project or colonize a region in the name. So by the 10th century, the Witan was a formal body issuing laws and charters. It was not at all democratic. Its authority was based on its right to choose kings. See, choosing the kings, hereditary kings, did not exist from the very start. At the beginning, kings were chosen. It's only later that very powerful kings decide that their sons, especially the eldest son, should become king afterwards. At the beginning, kings were chosen. And the first kings were chosen by this council. Usually, when a king is king, he dies or resigns or is ill, whatever. The council sits together and chooses another king from the council. We do not yet in that time where the son of the dying king becomes king after him. This will happen later. Without its support, the king's own authority was in danger. The Witan survives today